It's my honor to invite Herko Coomans to deliver this morning's keynote plenary session. Herko is known probably to many of us and to many people online as well. Herko serves as the International Digital Health Coordinator for the Ministry of Health and Welfare and Sport in the Netherlands, and is also part of the representative team chairing the Global Digital Health Partnership. Herko joins us today to really talk about what's going on at that GDHP level, the intersections we can make from the SNOMED international community, and observations and perspectives for really raising what we can achieve in terms of a global interoperability offering. So Herko, with that, please let's welcome him. Oh, actually, I'm going to say one more thing. We will have the opportunity to do some questions with Herko following his address, and that goes for individuals in the room as well as those online. So please submit your questions online, and we'll be sure that Herko gets a chance to answer them. Here, you can take that one if you want.
Thank you. So, good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Hi. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the warm welcome from our Norwegian hosts. It's, as everyone's been saying, it's gorgeous here, so I hope to have time to enjoy it. But we're here for a whole set of meetings. And I'm here to talk to you about something that I'm very passionate about in global interoperability. And to me, it sort of feels a bit like I'm here preaching to the choir. Because this group and this semi-annual meeting of SNOMED International, or the cult of SNOMED International, if you will, feels a bit like we're preaching to the choir. So I encourage you to say things like, "This is Jim Case's law," or "as Graham wills it," or "so saith the holy IG," or something like that. Like, this is our cult, our own, this is our choir. But I wanted to start off with this man, and this man is called John Cohn, and if you don't know him, I really recommend you look him up. He led the IBM IoT lab in Boston, and he is an IEEE fellow. And in my line of work, I get to travel around a lot and go to conferences. And one of the conferences I went to was South by Southwest. And he had a talk there. And he said something that really resonated with me in this cult of global interoperability. And what he said was that we are now at a crossroads. And at a crossroads, we can do two things. We can have technology-shaped society, or society-shaped technology. It was an automated slide. And we want this to have society to shape technology because it's the values that we bring as a society that we want to have be shaped by technology. So that in the end, we can use technology to make us more human instead of the other way around. And he said, we do this through standards. Standards aren't about the technology. Standards are about societal values such as autonomy and freedom and safety and privacy and all these other very core principles to our work that we then get to translate into the requirements that technology can use and be used within our society. They are the rules that we work with. So this is why it does feel a bit like our church. We are a core part of changing our, or implementing our societal values in the technology that we use every day. And those values are core to the way we do our healthcare as well. So that's why I think this is such a crucial thing. Also, it's something that we can do at our country level, or at our hospital level, or at our regional level, or whatever we want. But through this technology, it becomes international by default. Because we all have the same healthcare challenges. We all have the technology that is breaking down all these borders. And we're all working with data that is needed everywhere by everyone. So digital health, by definition, is an international thing, and what we hope to achieve is that it's a truly global effort. Because I think we have a unique window of opportunity here. And also, thanks to the pandemic that we had, there hasn't been this much funding in the digital health space since ever. It's a closing window, the funding window, but it's still there. There's so much systems reform, so countries are restructuring their health systems with data and technology at the core of their health system now, that we are being built into the system, if you will. And this is because there's this political will to change, because everyone saw during the pandemic that their health systems weren't future-proof and were under a lot of stress, and still are. And last but not least, the technology is used at scale and is mature at scale. So before we had all these ideas that the technology can do this, but it was difficult to get it at scale. But during the pandemic, we saw that the technology was actually there and could be deployed at scale. And now the whole AI developments are pushing this as well. So this is the general framework where a lot of countries are in and where a lot of people are in, and why we are here as well. So there was a group of countries that were at these conferences and having these talks and panels, and said every time, global interoperability is important, global collaboration is important, and they kept having these talks on these panels. And then they said, well, why are we just talking about it, and why aren't we doing it? So what happened was that this group of countries came together and said, we're going to form this partnership, which is called the Global Digital Health Partnership, which is uniquely formed by government agencies. So this is the policy and authority part of this ecosystem. And the World Health Organization is part of that too, which is very interesting in our context as well. And they said, what if we combine our policies and we start making similar policies that will help our own constituents and our own jurisdictions with our similar digital health strategies, but it will also help us get to that international and global level. So currently, and this is a bit of a weird map, because the gray countries are the members, and that's because it's a slide where all the countries are individual objects that you have to select, and they are white to start with. So it was either select 41 objects or select 160 objects. So sorry about that. But you can see that it's from all over the world. And we are actively working with groups in Asia and in Africa to expand our membership there. And again, these are the national digital health authorities. So these are the policy decision makers, and a lot of these policies are investment strategies or legislative packages or other types of policy instruments that we have. And together, this covers more than 40% of the world. But then again, we have India, so that you already have like a large chunk there already. Because these are all government people, we have this safe space where we can discuss all these emerging topics as well. And this really helps us develop policies faster. So currently the GDHP leadership means that there's a chair and the vice chair, and the Netherlands is chair for last year and this year, and after that it will be Portugal that will take over the chair position. And it started with Australia, India, then the US, and now the Netherlands. And technically, the GDHP doesn't exist. It's not a registered organization anywhere. It's a collective of national agencies and government bodies, and the secretariat moves with the chair. So it doesn't have a separate secretariat. And this is what it looks like when we meet, or at least from above. Very similar to these meetings. So, yeah, as you know, government people tend to do this a lot, talk a lot, and do presentations a lot, but what does it actually achieve? The magic happens in what we call the work streams, which are essentially work group that meet at a monthly or a bi-weekly basis. There's 5 of them, and there are 2 that I will highlight here. One from policy environments and one from interoperability. But the others are doing and creating a lot of interesting stuff as well. So I can recommend you you go visit the gdhp.health website if you are curious to what that looks like. First, the policy environments workstream. And I know this isn't a very readable slide, but this is the OECD framework for digital health policy, which they released in 2023. What we've done together with the OECD, who we have a collaboration agreement with, is create a tool that analyzes national digital health policy documents and maps them to these 26 different categories and topics of digital health so that we can create heat maps of policy. So that sort of looks like this. And this is an overview of all countries that have provided the documentation. So this is where you can see how many countries have actual policy documents and instruments related to all of these topics. And I've selected one that is from our colleagues from Korea, and you can see what their heat map looks like there. And this is what it looks like in the back end. It's a whole list of documents that is being mapped also with help from AI to all these topics, which if you're developing a new policy or if you're curious to what the market looks like or where are we moving towards, then this is a really interesting starting point to get an overview of what's happening at the government level, at the authorities level, which is quite authoritative for setting the market boundaries. The other one is why we're all here. This is the interoperability work stream. There's a couple of products there that are really interesting. One is we're finalizing the Global Observatory of e-health standards, which is, everyone says we use similar standards, but that's a way too general statement to make. So what we're doing in the GOES, this is the US leads this workshop, and they're very fond of their acronyms. So what we do here is we have an overview of which standards are used where and what is the status of those standards. And we provide interoperability policy guidance so that if you have to make a decision or formalize something like we use international standards, this could be your reference to when is something really an international standard in that list. Another thing that we're doing, which is what Don already mentioned, is we're working on implementing the IPS and adopting the International Patient Summary. And I wanted to highlight that as well. And I'm not sure if everyone here is familiar with the IPS. It's called the Patient Summary, so that's basically what it is. And it has these 6 chapters in there. And it's all structured, and SNOMED is part of the IPS through the global patient set that is freely available for everyone. And what I think that makes the IPS so special in this case, it is one of the real global standards because it's meant for communication between all these countries, no matter what type of health systems they have or what type of health information systems they use. So it is a very generalized and ubiquitously usable set of data. And as an example, this is what the Hajj looks like, the annual pilgrimage to Mecca. And as you can imagine, these are hundreds of thousands of people coming to Mecca in a space of 10 days. Most of them who are elderly or sick because they want to do this at least once in their lifetime. So there is a high probability of medical assistance and medical encounters. And the Ministry of Hajj of Saudi Arabia saw the IPS and said, we're going to just do this. They didn't take a lot of time to think about this, but they just said, we're going to do this. And then 7 months later, they did this with 4 countries. So they did this with Saudi Arabia, with Malaysia, with Indonesia, and Oman. I needed to memorize the flags and the countries, obviously. And like I said, they did this in 7 months. They rolled this out, which means in this case that for pilgrims that wanted to visit the Hajj from those countries or do their Hajj from those countries were required to have an IPS-generated document with them that they can then use in Saudi Arabia at these hospitals. And so this is sort of the architecture behind this, and they use the World Health Organization's Global Digital Health Certification Network. Again, the WHO is also very fond of their acronyms, as sort of the trust verifier for these documents. So they say this is a trusted sender and a trusted receiver of this document, so we know that it is valid and true. So with these 4 countries, they generated 250,000 electronic patient summary documents. Again, in 7 months' time since they started, they implemented this in 4 countries and were able to generate 250,000 of these documents, which were used in over 1,000 healthcare encounters, or the patients that were carrying these documents were in over 1,000 encounters, and over 600 IPS documents were actually used. And this is where you see that you can have all the technology in place, you can really do a rapid implementation, but then it's sort of the nurses need to know that they actually have to scan that code and then they have to use it, or that the doctors don't really trust it yet. Again, this is a first pilot. They did it already in this pilot phase. This was a huge scale, I think. And the next phase of this pilot is that they were going to add another set of 4 or 5 countries. And basically, they're looking for any country that has IPS that can join this group as well. And even if you have a small set of people who will probably go on this Hajj pilgrimage, then they still are very keen to have you join. So that's one example of where the patient summary is being used to drive this global exchange of health data. There are many other national and local initiatives and international initiatives that use the IPS as their base or as their source. You have the Raxel project in Latin America that are using it for cross-border communication in those countries. Brazil is using the IPS, which I think is really interesting. They're using the IPS, which we think of as a sort of a technical document, but they say we use this to democratize health data. For them, again, here it's the connection of societal values and why these standards are important. They say the IPS is our means to give our citizens control over their own health data. And we are all working on the technical part of that. The African Digital Health Network is being set up right now by the Africa CDC organization and several ministries of health in the African region. And they're looking at the IPS because it's a great starting point for them to jumpstart their efforts there. Australia has the Spark logo on there, and there's also national initiatives like the Canada patient summary and the New Zealand patient summary, but also Australia has a IPS-based Australian patient summary. And again, the World Health Organization has their certification network that supports the IPS for global exchange as well. So this is an example, I think, of we work on the technical side of these standards. But what we're trying to achieve here is true global interoperability. And it may sound like small or insignificant, but what we're doing here has a global impact already. And I think that's something that we need to foster together and why these meetings are so important. So this GDHP is open for countries to join, and there's a few countries here that might not be a member yet. It's there's no membership fee for joining the GDHP, other than that we ask your active participation. And if you have any questions about that, then feel free to ask. Yes, so that was my introduction. Are there questions? There's one there.
Oh, wait 1 sec.
Ik zeg eerst even goedemorgen. So that means I'm Dutch. Herko, wonderful presentation. I don't know you and you don't know me, but as a Dutch person who travels the world for data, it's very nice to hear this coming from a Dutch person.
However,
you were in Norway, I hear other people talk, etc. I looked on Google quickly, 5-6 million people in Norway, 70 million people in Netherlands. I traveled to India a lot. I just looked on the Worldometer. It's #1 in population. I meet health people all over the world, and I hear all kinds of different stories. So your story is again beautiful. I think I don't really have a question, but I think it's great hearing this. Standards are not important. Standards are important because we meet and we interact and we can make the data flow for the patients. So look forward to catch up with you and many other people here, because that's why we are here, making the data flow. Thank you.
I guess, Herko, I have a bit of a question too, and then, sorry, I'll just pop that in there, and then Brian, I'll come over to you. How do we connect this to what's going on within this community? You know, we convene as a representative of a standard, implement different regional, national implementations of that standard, all with, I think, very similar goals to what GDHP has in terms of goals. And also a lot of cross-representation from different countries, from different partnerships in terms of who we interact with from a collaboration perspective, et cetera. So what do you see as being a good intersection of this SNOMED CT community and what's going on at the GDHP level?
how long do we have? I can probably talk for a long time about this, but I won't. So there's several ways to look at this, I think. One is the realization that what we're doing actually does have that global impact and is very much values driven. And I think that's a really important message that everyone here can take home. That what we're doing isn't just hiding somewhere in a corner where it's very technical or what others might perceive as boring. but it really is a cornerstone of the way we are able to execute all our healthcare and even build our society the way we want to. So that's one. The other one, I think, is it's part of a growing maturity curve that every country is in. And SNOMED is an example of how we develop along with that maturity curve. The needs of the member countries of SNOMED are changing, and those changes are accelerating also, I think. Part of the changes are that what we're doing now is being formalized in national and supranational legislation, like the European health data space, but also very much in national health systems and in system reform. So our requirements for the use of SNOMED is changing alongside with that, because our national needs are accelerating as well, and are being more explicitly formalized. And I think that change and the way SNOMED has been able to cope with those needs over the past years, you can see that in the maturity of this organization as well. And I think one of the key aspects of these meetings is that we also understand that we need the capabilities that SNOMED International has created over the past decade or so, or maybe longer, and that we actually really need those capabilities in order to be able to meet the needs that we've just formalized in our legislation for the next, 20, 30, 50 years. And then the third part of that is that what everyone has alluded to already is all the geopolitical shifts that are happening right now, is that we need to be able to have this safe space where we can meet and where we can have tough decisions, or tough conversations and sharp conversations, I think, on some of these issues that we really need to make decisions on, and without having a fear that we lose each other. And I think that's what SNOMED provides as well, is that we have that safe space where we can actually build on the capabilities that we already have. And I think Don did an excellent summary of the ambition there that all these countries share. So I think that's where a lot of these overlaps are.
Wonderful. Thank you. I mean, I think we're all very much willing to be supportive of that call to action. So, and we thank you for bringing, insights from GDHP as well as other representative GDHP members across the SNOMED community. Brian?
Thank you, Herko. Appreciate it. I always love hearing about what's going on with the IPS and real world implementations of it. I think it's a wonderful simplification of the kind of overall perspective of standards that you can pressure test what all of these things are. My question though is actually, GDHP is a member nation organization, and coming from a perspective of not being here representing a member country, I wonder, but having tooling and expertise in this world, if there are opportunities for implementers, vendors, and private company players to have a role in this in one way or another.
Yes and no. A typical government answer. So one of the things that is really important about what the GDHP is doing is having that safe space for these government authorities. So no, you cannot be part of that safe space, which makes sense because we're discussing many emerging subsidy or investment packages, programs, and all those types of things. And we as government, we cannot have conflicts of interest there. Having said that, there's several ways, of course, you're already connecting with governments, like in these places. And we try to do as much publicly as we can. So a lot of our products are published on the website and other places where we share them. So you can engage with that with any of us, all the 41 members that we have. And we're working with a more formalized type of collaboration. We're working with the WHO and the Global Initiative on Digital Health, which is a G20 spin-out initiative that the WHO is running the secretariat of, and only the secretariat. But that's what they call a network of networks, and we are the government exclusive network in that. And we're working with them that they will set up other public-private or private expert networks so that we can engage with them in a more formalized way through that GIDH, or guide as they call it. But as we all know, the WHO isn't the fastest moving organization, and we are still pushing them on the creation of those networks. But otherwise, you can always reach out to me, and yeah.
Herko,
Now come the tough questions.
Don't know what you're talking about. A different space, I suppose, and it was touched on earlier in sort of in Don's address, talk about sort of the global digital hub for standards. You talked about the capabilities of SNOMED International. If I look across the globe, governments have put more trust and the records of our citizens in the hands of standards than has ever occurred, I think, probably in our lifetime. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And I'd say if I look back 10 years ago, it was a radically different landscape where most of us operated things that were very much sort of country specific. And we dreamed of data being able to flow within our countries, let alone between countries. We're now in a very different world. And I think you talked about sort of all these things coalescing together, which they are. What do you see the role of GDHP and also, I suppose, SNOMED International in terms of how do we ensure that those standards are actually fit for purpose for governments and for their citizens? And what do we do in the interesting geopolitical situations we currently find ourselves in where the viability of a number of these standards organisations is more in doubt than ever before?
Not a tough question then. So among all the standards development organizations, SNOMED is unique because of its governance model, or one of the unique characteristics, its governance model. And that is the 51 member countries are forming the General Assembly, which means that as countries, we have the ability to influence the way SNOMED is developed and deployed globally. This isn't something that every other standard organization has, which means that as we are formalizing our role as governments in that ecosystem, because we have a legislative responsibility, like in the EHDS or national legislation, or through large investment packages that we have set several requirements to, then we need that influence because it's the requirement that we steer this. So in the case of the IPS versus the European Patient Summary, for instance, as an example, the IPS doesn't have a country governance model, which means that we have the European Patient Summary, which we will retain for the time being, because we do have a direct link there to influence the way the European Patient Summary is being developed. So that's sort of a lesson that we need to take into account when we're looking at truly global governance of standards. Now, I think that there's, we can talk about this and brainstorm about this for another 2 hours, probably, maybe even longer, and I won't. But I think that we're now starting to reach that tipping point where both SNOMED has critical mass in its popularity and its use, where it's way more expensive to rebuild something similar in a different setting or in a different governance model, or for your own country alone, than just use what's already out there. And the same goes then for other standards that we are now committing ourselves to. But we don't have the infrastructure yet or the governance model yet for how this works at the global level, aside from having SNOMED as one of the main examples of how we govern this set of standards. And this is, I think, why the 51 countries that are members of SNOMED really pushed for the global standards hub to be part of our strategy here. And why we are working with the WHO to align SNOMED with ICD-11. Because we need to have that convergence. So we've had this time of diverging standards, the famous XKCD cartoon where they said, all these standards are out there, we need one that unifies them all, and then it's just, you have another new standard. And now we're working towards convergence because we are actually making these standards work to implement our societal values now. So I think that realization at the countries level has started slightly before the pandemic hit, but was really hit home during the pandemic that we actually need this convergence. And with that convergence comes this new form of governance that we need to find a form for. I think we all sort of start to grasp what the outlines are, but we don't know the form yet.
Thanks, Herko. I think we have another question.
There's a couple on this side, actually.
Oh, perfect.
Yes, I'm Michael Tan. I'm also from the Netherlands, so I have a typical Dutch question. Now, you're promoting here the International Patient Summary, and it's remarkable that Netherlands is promoting that, because in Netherlands, we also use another patient summary, the one from the GP. And the GPs also use not the SNOMED, but the ICPC. So my question is about your view, the vision, is how do you see that being implemented, the International Patient Summary? How do you see the migration? Because Netherlands already has a patient summary, but probably we're not the only country who already has a patient summary in the running. So how do you see that migration from the Dutch patient summary to the International Patient Summary?
So it's a good example of a broader problem that probably every country here recognizes. We all have, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but we have a legacy of standards and classifications and different types of technologies that we use. Many of us still use the fax machine in healthcare here, that are difficult to get rid of because they're useful and they are well implemented. And the goal of these standards that we want to converge on isn't to implement something that isn't useful or doesn't serve healthcare as the others do. So in your example of the Dutch GP summary, and again here we are legally bound to use the European patient summary and not the international patient summary, even though they're very similar, because of the European health data space, which has gone into effect a week and a half ago. So there will always be migrations from one system to the other everywhere. And what in the case of the Dutch standard, we will be migrating towards the European patient summary as the core of the Dutch patient summary, because that way, what many countries are doing is using the international summary as the standard or as the base for their national standard, and then sort of create an extension or something similar from that for specifically national uses. And that's going to hurt, but that's the way this works. And the question about are we willing to take that pain is a political one. And that's something that every jurisdiction has to decide by themselves. And that's probably more a decision of not if we want to do this, but how long are we willing to take to make this transition, and how much money are we willing to, or other resources are we willing to put into this. But my message here is that globally what we're seeing is this movement of convergence. Everyone is saying we need international standards, which is an easy thing to say, but what makes something an international standard? If Belgium uses the same one as ours, then is it an international standard? That's a question. We don't have a registry of international standards in that way. So these are complex issues that we, especially these implementation and migration paths. But what I think is that more and more we see that things like the IPS, which is informed by the European Patient Summary, are the starting point of where we converge to, instead of something that is seen as an extra standard more and more. And this is what the slide with the Ruxel and the Africa Digital Health Network, and they're all starting with the IPS and not with their own version of the patient summary.
I think we have one over here, and then we'll come over here.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Herko, for the excellent presentation. And I want to highlight one more role. I was part of CDHP when I was in the government position 18 and 19. And it's an excellent support network for government officials. Sometimes people in charge of e-health strategy change often, and maybe too often sometimes, and people get there without large experience in the field. And having a resource like CDHP to look for what other countries are doing and see, okay, standards, what standards are they using? And having a forum in which you can sit down and say, why are you using this standard? Why it's combined with this? What was your experience? It's invaluable. I think it's a really important resource for government officials everywhere.
Thank you. And I think many of the people who are part of the GDHP here agree.
Good morning, I'm Christine, I'm from Germany, so delegate from DIN, and thank you very much for your presentation. I have to confess that I was very impressed by your example of the pilgrimage. So the IPS, that was really speaking to me. Then I went back to the map and noticed Germany is not a member. I also know that we call it Gesundheitskarte, so that's again a national implementation. And Michael, thank you very much for your question, even Dutch implementation. So maybe we can take it up in the upcoming days to ask that question. Do we have to issue here a real ISO standard? Is that a topic for working group 6 or another working group? Basically, I just wanted to thank you to create that awareness again.
You're welcome.
We've got Dr. Guttridge who has a question.
Well, thank you very much, ma'am. Herko, I'm trying to think through sort of business models for this. And so my question is simple, well, the question's simple, the answer's complicated, I think. Do you think individual countries should be incentivizing the vendor community to produce an IPS output?
Yes. If you look at the Hajj example, so Saudi Arabia isn't what they call a resource-constrained country, so that makes it easier. And especially as they have a ministry of Hajj that can set the requirements globally for anyone who wants to participate in that pilgrimage. So they have a couple of head start tick boxes, if you will, already there. But anyone can think of the next Olympics or any sports World Cup, like big events, international events that have a large medical relevance for them. So it could be individual countries that do that. Many countries that are investing in IPS currently are doing this because they use it as a starting point for their national patient summary, and sort of have the international part as a bonus. But those types of events are run by organizations that are led by countries mostly, or organizations that have a national mandate. So I think it's sort of like the international part could either be the bonus of a national implementation, or maybe, and it can be the business case can be very much from the international perspective. One of the things that we're also looking at is the combination of the civil and the military use of patient summaries in conflict situations, which is now very much in all of our international resilience work is now very much well, being prepared for large-scale international conflicts, where we have already designated hubs where patients will flow through, and there will be probably a combination of military and civil patients all through each other, and which currently are very much separated health data systems, at least. So there's many different types of use cases where there will be international exchange, or not just international, but any cross-border, what type of border it is, organizational or jurisdictional borders, exchange of health data, where the IPS is now sort of the go-to solution that also has a lot of infrastructure already behind it.
Thanks, Herko. I think we have one more question in the back.
Yeah, goedemorgen. My name is Leonora van Dorp, also from the Netherlands, but I don't have a Dutch question, but a European question. So my question is, how do the development of the GDHP relate or connect? How is it connected to the EHDS?
So the European health data space, for those few Europeans that are here in this room, is a European regulation, which means that it's law that is directly applicable in the 27 EU member states. That sets that regulation sets a lot of requirements that we have to comply with directly. The GDHP is a group of governments that span have a broader reach than the European continent or the European Union. So there isn't a direct link between the GDHP and the EHDS in that sense. There is a direct link in the sense that if you look at what the GDPR has done for privacy at a global level, it has become sort of the golden standard for dealing with for privacy in health in any data. One of the things that we are looking at is whether or not the EHDS will have a similar effect on health data governance at the global level, both from the effect of that many countries do business in Europe and will have to comply with those rules if they do anything in any of these 27 countries, but also because that will have a broadening effect. Like I said, the GDPR is sort of now the global standard. So India has a GDPR-like privacy legislation. Japan has, Australia has something very similar. Brazil has, so all these other big markets are joining sort of, again, here, legislation is a part of standardization work. It's a similar process of formalizing our our societal values in that. So there is that effect of the EHTS that we are looking at in the GDHP, whether or not that will have a broader impact in the non-European GDHP countries. Does that answer your question? Thank you. You can stand here if you want.
No, it's on now. Thanks, Herko. Last two brief questions. What does short-term success and long-term success look like for the GDHP?
Short-term success is that we have new members from smaller countries that have their own unique set of challenges in digital health. Countries like in Africa, which are geographically per se smaller, but smaller in their digital health footprint, if you will. And long-term, I think, is providing guidance for that convergence process. An example of that is that we are already invited by the G20 to be an expert organization on digital health topics, which is sort of like there is no global digital health authority, and it's not the WHO, and they're very aware of that right now. So the GDHP is sort of the next best thing in that guidance of global and global developments in digital health. And I think that's where the GDHP can grow more and more into.
Thank you for such a thought-provoking session. Everyone, can we thank Herko for his participation today?